Welcome back to another episode of Heating Up. I'm your host, Adam Heisler. My special guest here today is a former roommate of mine as well as a former teammate of mine, Mr. Sean Laird. Sean, we say hello to everybody.
How you guys doing? Sean Laird, owner of Laird's Training. I train guys here up in Kokomo, Indiana. I also coach in the Indiana Bulls organization at the 17 block age level. Thanks for having me on, Adam.
Awesome. Great to have you. Yeah, so me and Sean were roommates our senior year at the University of South Alabama, so there's a lot of time in the apartment talking shop, whether it's baseball, whether it's strength and conditioning, whether it's fantasy football, just all types of different types of stuff. And one thing I really wanted to bring him on today is we'll get to the baseball stuff later on, but just how important strength and conditioning is in a standpoint of all athletes as well as all ages. Can you kind of specify to help clear some stuff up for some parents that are having questions?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things that I definitely want to address here. So when it comes to strength and conditioning, and people use the buzzword multi-sport athlete a lot, and I'm all on board with having people play as multiple sports as possible. But when it comes to, like, if you look at the high level guys, the guys that go play D1 baseball, D1 football, the guys that go professional, like, you're not going to see a weak athlete at those age levels. You're going to see somebody that's fast twitch. You're going to see somebody that's strong. And so I think strength and conditioning, especially in the baseball, dimension, is kind of overlooked a lot. And guys will buy into the process of doing as many hitting lessons as possible or pitching lessons as possible. But you've got to treat strength and conditioning as its own sport. If we're wanting to build multi-sport athletes, getting with the right strength coach and helping build your athlete or build your son or build your daughter into that athlete that you want them to be or they want to be, it starts in the weight room. And a lot of it, with hitting and pitching, you're talking core stability, being able to control the mobility, rotating the bottom half, hip shoulder separation, all that stuff. If you get in a good program, that's where it's going to build your foundations to making you the best athlete you can be. And I would say the biggest misconception is that you have to wait until you're 14, 15 years old. At right around 11, 12 years old, I would definitely be starting your kids. Like, I have a couple 11-year-olds to 12-year-olds in my program right now. We got kids at all age levels. Like, I'll have in the same session, I'll have a Division I athlete, right, an All-American Division I player, and an 11-year-old, right? And as a coach, obviously, I'm going to have my program, but I'm also going to make sure that I'm addressing issues that both of them need, right? With a Division I player, we're making sure that, a lot of baseball players are lat dominant, so we work a lot of lower trap. We work a lot of thoracic spine mobility, so he's not favoring certain things when he's getting overhead of his arm. And with an 11-year-old, the basics are going to win. And when I say basics, too, is the basics will work with the lower age groups, right? And the basics work with the older age groups. And I think people get caught up in this functional training, which is another misconception. The biggest thing that's functional, right, is picking things up, squatting, lunging, carrying, those basic movements that make us athletes and make us who we are as human beings. That's what we really need to focus on in the weight room. That's really what's going to separate you, getting at an early age and starting at an early age and being able to continue that throughout the rest of your career.
Man, that's awesome stuff there. And you've done this for how long is Laird's training? About 8 years, 10 years? How long has it been going now?
So we've been doing this. I actually started, you could say that I started Laird's training back in 2009, doing lessons in Alabama. I actually moved back to Indiana after grad school at South, after, obviously, I went through a lot of injuries playing and everything. And doctors were pretty much like, hey, you can play catch with your kids one day, or you can try to make a go at it, but we just don't think your arm's going to be able to make a throw as much from the right field anymore. And I had a lot of surgeries. So I went to finish grad school with focusing on health and exercise science. And I moved back and I wanted to open up Laird's Training, which I did part-time, but I also took a job as a strength and conditioning coach at Westfield High School, which is in the Indianapolis area for people that are watching. We had a lot of success there. And I was doing Laird's Training kind of part-time from that 2011 to 2014 range. And then right around 2014, after doing about, 10 hours a week, I was like, I want to do this full-time. So I resigned from my job at the high school as a strength coach. And since 2014, I had another shoulder surgery that fall. And right after I rehabbed and got 3 months in the sling, and as soon as I was able to be cleared, I started doing about November of 2014, started focusing on training athletes. And here we are, April 2020, rocking and rolling and having fun training guys and training athletes.
That's awesome, man. And one thing I want to elaborate on is one of the slogans the White Sox used was your best ability is your availability. And with that going forward is you mentioned the injuries you had. And now how important is the injury prevention part of the strength and conditioning? I know everybody wants to get bigger, faster, stronger, but I think especially as the older you get and the more you continue to do this is so important. Just what is going to help me stay on the field as much as possible? How much do you stress that to your athletes when you're training them?
Absolutely. And that's something that, again, is another overlooked thing. Like, my number one job as a strength and conditioning coach is keeping my athletes healthy. And I know, like, as you know, like we underachieved a lot at South. In our last year, we had a lot of guys go down in injury, and nothing against the strength and conditioning coaches there. The knowledge base that we have in 2020 is completely different than what it was in 2010. And so I have to address, certain high risk areas. So if I'm working with a basketball player, we're paying attention to his knees, we're paying attention to his ankles. We're trying to do as much prehab as we can. Looking at a baseball player, we want to make sure that he has good shoulder stability. Rotator cuff's got to be strong, and we got to make sure we have mobility in the thoracic spine, which I mentioned earlier before, mobility in the hips. I got a wrestler, I got to take care of his neck, right? I got to take care of his ankles and his knees. So there's certain things that you have to look at each population from each sport, and we have to make sure that we're addressing those issues. Then, right, the player development, if we're doing it the right way, we focus on that, and then the player development is the other part. So like when guys will come see me, they'll have like a pre-warm-up that they need to do. So if there's somebody that has lower back issues or somebody that has shoulder issues, they know there's 3 exercises. As soon as they show up, they got to do them, right? And it's one thing if I have to get on guys constantly because they have a tendency to like kind of skate through and not do what they're supposed to do, which is fine because they're learning how to work hard. And they'll get on those exercises, and then we get to the nitty-gritty part. And then we usually have about 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the workouts to kind of address any other issues, any soreness, and everything from there. So keeping athletes healthy first, number 1 goal. 2, the player development and the physical development would be my next goal.
All right. The last thing we'll touch on for strength and conditioning standpoint, we have a question that Coach Sean Laird, what is your favorite exercise for baseball players? Let's just say top 3. What would be your top 3 exercises for baseball players?
I was about to say, if you told me a favorite exercise, it would be hard to pick one. So, there's different strokes for different folks. So there's from all the research and all the data, like we'll record data from guys that do, anywhere between a 1 rep max all the way up to an 8 rep max, anywhere from that range. And I want to make sure they're progressing. And the biggest correlation that I've seen guys to build velocity, to build bat speed, to create power is the deadlift. And I'm talking about a straight bar deadlift. Nothing against the hex bar deadlift. It has its place. But straight bar deadlift, I've seen tremendous improvements in the weight room that correlate onto the field. Heavy sled pushes and heavy sled drags. Those are huge exercises. Teaching lower body power. If you notice those first 2, they're lower body and posterior chain dominant, right? Yep. And I would say number 3 would be med ball plyometric ballistic exercise. We're actually trying to throw and be explosive with med ball. We're doing rotational work. We're teaching guys how to use their bottom half, and we have regressions and progressions for those exercises, but essentially teaching guys like, hey, I don't want to be all arm and all upper body. Let's really focus on using the bottom half. If I was trying to be an Division I baseball player, I would focus on those 3 exercises and having those obviously periodized and done in the right program.
That's awesome stuff right there. And speaking of, you were a Division I baseball player, and Sean will say it himself, but I truly believe Sean would have been a Major League Baseball player if it wasn't for the fact that the injuries kept in the way. I played with him for 2 years. He had everything scouts look for: size, speed, bat speed, power, average, arm. He had all the above. Unfortunately, he was struck with some injuries, and here we are today. But it's such a cool experience to have a coach like you work with the youth athletes on kind of guiding in the right direction of, yes, do these, no, don't do these, and kind of look out for each individual person. So now let's take it over to the baseball field, Sean. And Sean, what was your approach as a hitter, both in, say, pregame batting practice and then, let's say, now in the game? What is an approach that you had?
Absolutely. So in a game, I was also hunt fastballs, right? And it's something that I don't want to say is overused, but it's something that it's a mentality a lot of people work, because if you hit the fastball at a high level, high velocity, you're going to play, right? And so that was a mentality. And when I went to college, like, there wasn't a fastball I couldn't hit. The problem was I made an assumption that they were going to give me a pitch to hit when I went to college. So once I was like, they're not giving me a fastball here, I need to figure this out, right? So I had a lot of power, as you know, but I also swung and missed a lot too. So when I first showed up, I'm obviously understanding the strike zone was a big thing, and saying that you understand the strike zone, but actually having the discipline when you're up there is a completely different animal. And so I will talk about this. Like my first couple years in college, I did well, but I was definitely underachieving. And like I said before, I was assuming I was going to get my pitch to hit. And the problem is that I had to prove to them that I wasn't going to chase after their best pitch or their junk early to get to my pitch either later on, or sometimes I couldn't miss my pitch early. So the biggest thing was consistency for me for those first couple years. And then right around my junior year, I kind of started, figuring things out, if you will, which obviously in hitting, as you know, you're never figuring things out completely. You're always learning. So I understood that my pregame routine, and I can't stress this enough for people listening, once I understood my pregame routine and BP and the drills I needed to do to help me and the mindset I needed to work on, that transition to the consistency in the game where I wasn't missing my pitch in at-bats. And I was able to see pitches up. And I'll tell you, there's a couple of things. And Adam, he'll understand this 100%. Once I made the decision, hey, I'm going to work on things I need to work on in BP that I struggle with consistently. So what was that? One, it was staying through the ball. I had a tendency to kind of pull it off at times and kind of cut the ball off. And now I know that I had a lot of mobility issues and hip issues that I didn't understand back then. But once I kind of figured out, okay, hey, so I could hit in BP when I was younger, hit home runs, feel good, and then I'd get in the game, I'd be 0 for 4 with 2-3 Ks and pop up, right? So I was like, why am I not being consistent here? And then once I made a decision hey, I'm going to focus on right center field gap. I'm going to focus on hitting line drives about 10 to 20 feet in the air, in the gap, hard on a line. Then I have my inside round where, boom, I'll make some turns. I'll hit a couple bombs or hit a couple balls in the gap to the left side of the field. And then I go right back to that right side. And what that did for me is it kept my swing short and quick to the ball, right? Keeping my barrel in the zone for a long period of time, hitting the balls opposite field. And it allowed me to be consistent with that routine. And then I noticed in the game, boom, my hands were quicker. I wasn't getting too big. And this is something that's butchered so bad nowadays is guys will get inside for BP. And I'll get new clients in, right? And we'll do an assessment. And I'll throw that 40-mile-an-hour BP. And they can have, as big of attack angles they want. They get big movements in their swing, and they can look pretty. But as soon as we give them some stressful velocity where I'm throwing hard, especially a short distance BP or try to throw some two seams inside, then they're getting jammed and they're getting beat. And everybody, as you know, at college, everybody can hit bombs, right? Everybody has power. Everybody is playing. You're playing with the best of the best in the country, right? So what you've got to understand as a player that's coming up in this game is you got to understand your routine. You got to understand your strengths, right? And you got to understand your weaknesses. So another weakness I'll add on here at the end of this is seeing sliders up. So when I was in high school, I probably saw a good slider maybe once or twice the entire season, right? So when I started standing in bullpens, I had no purpose of trying to swing at these pitches. I was just sitting there standing, I was tracking pitches. And once I was able to start reading spin and seeing the ball out of the hand better and being consistent with that, then it was able for me to lay off those pitches in the game. And there's definitely a lot of stuff that I'm not adding on. We could talk about this for hours, but when it comes to a strength and conditioning department, controlling my hands better, keep my hands up, hands back, different approaches on how to hit certain curveballs. Like if I saw a good curveball, I had to think right field line to hit that ball. If I didn't think right field line, I would pull off immediately. So those are little approaches as a hitter that you got to understand. And you got to understand, this is what I have to think in order to execute this movement in my swing. So those are a little bit into the mindset that kind of helped me develop as a hitter as I went through college.
No, that's great insight. And I love to have different people on that have different approaches on what works for them. I think a lot of people these days are trying to cookie cut people and make everybody the same exact hitter. And as you mentioned earlier, not everybody moves the same. Not everybody has the same strengths and weaknesses. Somebody's bat speed might be some better than somebody else's. Somebody's bat might stay in the zone a lot longer than somebody else's. So that was great insight on what works for you. And man, that was really cool stuff to dive deep into depth like that and kind of talked about what was it that made you be successful at that level. And I love how you mentioned that pitchers are up there trying to get us out. I think a lot of times hitters as well as some parents think hitting is easy, and it's not. And they have a job to get us out, and our job is to try to get them. And when it comes down to it, it's the hardest thing to do in all the sports. So there's not one way to do it. It's a lot of the ones that are successful have what I call is kind of the meat and potatoes to everything, but adding the little tricks here and there is what works perfect.
Absolutely.
Yep. All right, let's move on to another one. So you train a lot of athletes. I want you to kind of talk about just mental toughness. And I see your toughness tips of the day. And Sean, go ahead and give your Twitter handle, your Instagram handle, that stuff, so the guys can check you out. And I would highly suggest you check these things out, because not only in the baseball world, but just in life, how they can help each and every day, especially as we're going through these times right now.
Absolutely. So obviously with COVID-19 going on right now, it's a real sad, it's a trying time for a lot of us here. And we've had Laird's training shut down for the last 3 weeks, and it looks like we're probably going to be shut down for the rest of April as well, as I know Adam is as well. And so I post toughness tips of the day, and you can find me on Twitter at Sean Laird 16, Instagram at Laird's Training. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Laird's Training. And the big thing with the toughness tip of the days and things I want, and this is gonna be a little morbid here, but I always think about this just in the trials and tribulations I've had in my life, and growing up in the Midwest, and that mentality is like, what do I want to pass on to my own children? And what do I want to pass on to the athletes that I train with? And so the number one goal at Laird's Training is developing men and women first, and then the player development second. I want parents to know when they come to see me, like, we're training your son how to be, right? We're training your daughter how to be accountable for her actions and hold herself accountable consistently. And the respect is a big thing for me. Respect for people's time, respect for people's work ethic, understanding that we need to lift people up. So like in the weight room, when you guys will come in, I want to make sure that my older guys are acting as if they're assistant coaches, and they're lifting these young guys up, and they're creating that kind of camaraderie in that environment. We obviously have fun, and we make fun of each other, and the kids will mess with me and I'll mess with them back. But when I'm giving those toughness tips of the days, like, I don't have a certain schedule. When something really hits me to my heart, or hits me to my soul, I want to post something. And any trial and tribulation that I've been through in my life that could maybe help somebody else, or help somebody through a trying time. Because obviously, I mean, as you know, you're a role model, but also you talk about stuff with athletes and stuff they may be struggling with, right? They may be struggling with something at home because you don't really necessarily know their environment. Maybe struggling with something at school. And it's our jobs not only to be role models, but it's also to help lift people up, because we want to make sure that we're creating an environment where we're growing the future of America and the future of your area. And we want to make sure that we're doing that to the best of our abilities. And it's definitely something I take very seriously, and something I want to do the best I can with. Because, if, one day, life's short, if I'm not around, I want to make sure that, the people that I impact have that same mentality, so we can grow stronger together in that atmosphere.
That's awesome stuff. And I think I've kind of learned that as getting into the coaching world, it's not always about the stats kids put up on the weekends. It's about the little things of, hey, so-and-so went and volunteered their own time to work this over here, and building relationships and showing them how to become young men and women is just such a cool part of coaching and what we get to do. All right, let's move on to, now that you've trained some athletes and you trained some guys that are at the D1 level, some pro guys as well, as what would you say is the big separator from one that gets to play in college or gets a shot to play at pro ball versus maybe the ones that don't make it?
Absolutely. So we've had a lot of actually really big time pitchers come out of the program, a lot of big hitters as well. We had a couple years ago, we had a top 5 finish in Mr. Baseball and a top 5 finish for Miss Softball in the same year at Laird's Training, which is really cool to see. And to dive into that, the guys that are in college and the guys that I coach in the Indiana Bulls organization. So you have that small percentage that they're super talented athletes, and they're going to make a high level no matter what, right? Saying that, those guys, when they make that high level, they have to, whether they're working hard at high school or whether they're not, they're going to have to make a decision sooner or later when they're facing the best of the best. Because a guy that has super talent, that kind of just puts in a little bit of work, versus a guy that has a lot of talent, puts in a lot of work, I'm going to put the guy that's working hard all day long is going to win that battle. But the biggest separator, so if I'm looking at the biggest separator for college, whether you're playing D1, D2, D3, going to JUCO route first, is those guys understand the purpose of intent. And they understand the purpose of discipline. Those 2 words, and what I mean by intent is there being not intent like, oh, I'm trying to get everything I got into this throw, everything I got in this hit, this swing. What I mean by intent is being intentional in everything that you do, and understanding, like, hitting with a purpose today. I'm going to work on these weak points today. I'm trying to throw harder. If I'm a lefty, I'm throwing 84 miles an hour, which is, pretty good, great. But if you want to get recruited at that next level, you need to be in that upper 80s, right? So with that athlete specifically, those guys that make that, there's a bunch of lefties I've seen come to the Indiana Bulls, come through the programs, right? And you'll give them, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, right? I've seen guys stay at that 84 mile an hour and they end up not playing anywhere, and they have the ability to play somewhere. And I've seen other guys go up to 88, 89, 90 mile an hour and absolutely tear it up. And you never know how, like, velocity is, as a pitcher is like this, right? And obviously as a hitter, like, there's some guys that something will click after a year. Some guys it takes 2 or 3 years to work on. But if you have that discipline to work day in and day out, you have that, you're intentional with everything that you do, and you're constantly working. You're ignoring outside distractions. And I think that's a big thing. Is, if I would add a third thing, is limiting distractions and understanding that you need to focus on your goals first, and then you can have your free time later, like earn your free time. And all the guys I see playing in college baseball, they had grit, they worked hard, they're doing things the right way, and they continue to be successful at that next level. And the other aspect of things, I've seen guys that get to that next level and they kind of dissipate a little bit because they didn't have those foundations in high school. So if you want to be great at anything in life, and people always want to use the exception to the rule, that 99.99% guy, you cannot be elite without putting in elite work ethic. And that's a correlation that I see with every single person out there. And as you know, we play with a lot of guys that had super talent. We play with some guys that were really talented, but then all of a sudden work ethic, and all of a sudden over time, it's like, wow, that guy's a superstar now. And those are the things, and it's kind of a cliche, but if you are just consistent, there's going to be days you don't feel good. There's going to be days you don't want to do something. And I use this rule, like, hey, you feel like 60% today? Well, give me 100% of your 60%. Give me everything you got today. We're going to get better one way or another. That's the biggest difference between guys I see playing at a high level and working on their weaknesses, and, understanding you have to have humility. You can't have an ego. Like, you got to understand, like, if you're weak at something, make that a strength. You have to. Because if you just rely on your strengths, sooner or later, somebody's going to expose those weaknesses.
That's great advice right there. And it sounds like there's such a cool culture that you have there with Laird's training, as well as I love how you put your older guys kind of in charge to be young assistant coaches, and it just passes on down and you create a system. And when you show there and you show up ready to work, it's hard not to adapt to that culture and just get after it with the guys. Because one thing I can say is I think our senior year, we were kind of the leaderships of the team, and we brought it every single day in the weight room as well as on the field. And I think it carried over to why we had a lot of success on the field, especially from a hitting standpoint. All right, to end the day, let's kind of talk about who are some of Sean Laird's mentors, both in the baseball world and then just in life in general.
Awesome. Yeah. So when it comes to the baseball world, I was a Bulls guy, obviously, in Indiana. So Scott Rowland is like the big time Bulls guy here in Indiana. And I played shortstop and third base growing up. And then obviously my freshman year, I went to South, and David Freese was playing third. So I knew that I needed to make a change there and move somewhere else, but also ended up medical redshirt anyway from back injury. But when it comes to playing, like, I was a big Scott Rowland fan, a big Chipper Jones fan. And I just watched the game. Like, everybody's always like, who's your team? And I really never really had a team, because in Indiana, we don't really have a professional team. As you like living in Alabama, like, probably a lot of Braves fans. And so I wanted to be just like those guys. I wanted to be, power hitting third baseman. I wanted to have the tools, the gold glove tools, all that stuff. And so I was always I wanted to be that guy that had that work ethic. And because Scott Rowland, like, he'd hit a bomb, he'd look down on the ground, he'd do his jog. And Chipper had that swagger that everybody knew Chipper had. And I thought that dude was so cool growing up. And when it comes to a mentor and, growing up and playing the game, and my father was by far my biggest mentor in life. The work ethic that he instilled, and the mindset, like, how to be a man, like, you're only as good as your word in this world, and you got to put in work in this world. And I can remember just, we had one car at time, and at times I had to drop him off at work, go get my brother, help him get ready for school, and then go lift in the morning. Right. And that kind of work ethic and that kind of mindset and what I had to do and how he basically raised me, I kind of took that ball and ran with it. And I applied that with everything I did in life. I applied it in the classroom, and I applied it in school. I applied it as a hitter, and now I'm applying it as a coach and how I take care of things. And I can't stress enough, like, I was very blessed to have a father like that, and I was very motivated in being around, seeing baseball players like that. And my high school team, my high school Bulls team, we had 3 big leaguers, and Lance Lynn, Josh Bloom, and Tommy Hunter on them. So there was so much talent around, and that competitive atmosphere raises your level of play. So if you're not in a situation where you don't have those type of mentors, my biggest advice is you need to make sure that you have a good camaraderie, a good group. Like me and Adam, obviously we lived together in college, and we had a buddy Clint that lived with us too. And we were always, training together, competing with each other, trying to raise that level. And if you can find a crew, a couple of guys that help you with that, your buddies can be your mentors. Your buddies can raise your level of play and help you through those times. Like, man, I need to get this, and this done today. I can always rely on person A, person B, and person C to help me through this. And that's the big advice I have is right there and hold each other accountable. There's gonna be times where you get into it with people, but that's part of life. Just because you get into it with somebody doesn't mean you don't love that person, and helping each other raise to that next level is just such a big aspect of growing and having that, mentorship. Because sooner or later, that person that looks up to other people, there's gonna be people looking up to you. And you wanna make sure that you have those same qualities that you look for in a person to mentor you as well.
Man, that's awesome stuff. And man, thanks, Sean. I can't thank you enough for coming on today and joining us and kind of sharing your knowledge, as well as just kind of what's made you and what's made Laird's training. I've really enjoyed this. I think there's something that maybe we can put out in the future where we continue to come on and talk about it. And guys, if you're in the Indiana area or anywhere in the Midwest, I highly suggest you go check out Sean. And I hope we'll see you on the ball field somewhere this summer. When you're with the Bulls, I'm with the Knights. And hopefully we can talk shop all summer long, and we'll get back to playing baseball and get back to the real world, Sean.
Absolutely, brother. Appreciate having me on, guys.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Sean.
Yep. Have a
All right,
good
take
one.
care.